Hello there. I've been looking recently at some of the first translations of the Bible into English back in the early 1500s. These weren't the very first translations because there'd been translations into Old English in the days of the Anglo-Saxons, and there had already been translations into other languages like German. But it was still a big event, and one which was sometimes encouraged by King Henry VIII, who was a considerable biblical scholar. Before this translation, no one could read the Bible in his or her own language because only Latin versions were available. But remember, very few people could read anyway, and many of those who could were members of professions who would need to know Latin. Gradually through the 1500s, more people in the merchant and yeoman classes were starting to read things like business letters and reports in English, and they would need a Bible that they could read in the same language. Tyndale's version was written in a very direct style. When talking about Joseph in Egypt, he says, "He was a lucky fellow." And that seems more up to date to us than many later translations. The authorized version says he was a prosperous man. Doesn't have the same punch, does it? Tyndale's version was finished by Miles Coverdale, then followed by the Bishop's Bible and the Genevan Bible and the Great Bible, and at last in 1611, the authorized version. But all of these versions kept a lot of Tyndale's first stab, and many of the best-loved passages in the authorized version are copied directly from Tyndale. And now, of course, we're spoilt for choice. We have many, many new translations using very good and well-researched sources of the Greek and Hebrew books. In the Abbey, we use the New Revised Standard Version in services. Well, it's a shame that we need to have text translated, and perhaps we don't. I once heard of a church where a Greek New Testament was put on the lectern, and the clergy, who always read the lessons, were expected to translate these and then to read it out in English there and then. I don't think that would do for Old Testament readings, though. You would have to be a very learned man or woman to manage to translate from the Hebrew like that. And now here's a little part of Genesis chapter 39 in the version that Tyndale wrote in the 1500s. Joseph was brought unto Egypt, and Potiphar, a lord of Pharos, and his chief marshal, an Egyptian, bought him of the Ishmaelites, which brought him thither. And the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a lucky fellow, and continued in the house of his master, the Egyptian. And his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all that he did prosper in his hand. Wherefore he found grace in his master's sight, and served him. And his master made him ruler of his house, and put all that he had in his hand. And as soon as he had made him ruler over his house, and over all that he had, the Lord blessed this Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. And the blessing of the Lord was upon all that he had, both in the house and also in the fields. And therefore he left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and looked upon nothing that was with him, save only on the bread which he ate. And Joseph was a goodly person, and a well-favoured.